So, of course, South Africa coming in 52nd, so leading the way when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa. Do you think that's a fair number to put us when we talk about South Africa's global competitiveness?
Well, thank you, Vera. I think we have to see it in the context of, obviously, the challenges in the global economy, but also in terms of the improved competitiveness by some of the countries, as you've seen some of the countries that have gained on the continent as well, countries such as your Ghana, your Nigeria, but also you have additional countries that have come on, like your Liberia, Gabon. What is clear is that there's increasing, strides to become more competitive by different countries. Rwanda, for example, for the past 3 years or so, they've actually been doing well. Having said that, though, I think it is important to see that South Africa still holds its own in those areas that are very critical. For instance, if you look at financial market development, issues of corporate governance in terms of our boards, the regulation of our stock exchanges, those are areas where we still remain within the top 5. In fact, we in terms of our stock exchange, we still are the first one.
And when you go out there and sell brand South Africa, are these aspects of South Africa that are clearly communicated in the markets, people understand that, and the reasons why people find South Africa attractive?
Yes, indeed, these are factors that are communicated. For example, if you look at the banking sector, our financial market development, obviously strong banks are very important for economic development. And if you look at last year, we've made significant gains there. There are areas of challenge, but if you look at the areas where we are making significant strides, it's very encouraging. In the area of higher education, which also is very important from an innovation point of view in terms of creativity and the skills that you need for the economy, we have made significant strides from 97 to 84, for instance.
And of course, you can't ignore the fact that when it comes to labour market practices, South Africa is sitting at 143 when it comes to rankings. How's everything that's taken place, specifically recently, the latest being the miners marching to the Korea mine from Marikana, how has all of that influenced brand South Africa and South Africa's reputation?
Look, I think the point is that, the issue of industrial action and strikes, those things are, enshrined in our constitution, and I think investors do understand that. The challenge becomes when they become...
I mean, when it's being communicated across the world on headlines, and you get a sense from even just speaking to currency analysts that people are phoning and they don't understand how bad the situation is and they're fearful.
No, I was going to add, that is something that's understood. The fact that there is a time when there's bargaining between the employer and employee, that is understood by investors. However, which is what I was going to add, the challenge becomes when these strikes take on a violent turn. And that is, I think, what then deters investors. If you look at the recent report, one of the areas where we've actually slipped is in terms of relations between employer and employee. And that is really driven from the relationship in terms of whether it's a violent strike or whether it's a peaceful strike and how those issues are resolved. So that's the point I was trying to highlight, that it is important that we do not become complacent, but we really address that and get the maturity in terms of our labor and industrial relations to understand the impact of violent strikes.
Do you think that policymakers, government, perhaps executives at Lonmin, all the likes, are dealing with the situation in the right way?
Well, I don't think it's for us to comment, but I think it is important to reassure whether it's the investor community out there or business that whatever has happened in terms of the Marikana incident will be dealt with in accordance with the rule of law, which is what we are known for as a country, and those are the things that we need to assess. So it is important to take into account, obviously, as I said earlier, that strike action in itself, when it takes the kind of a violent turn, it does have the consequence of a deterring investment or people perceiving the employer-employee relationship in our country not to be very conducive, for instance, for investment. And that is an issue that we need to deal with. And one would hope that the business and employers and government policymakers who are involved are cognizant of that. And I do believe that with the actions that have been taken, there is a lot of cognizance of that.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it certainly is appearing to reach a crisis level, and it still isn't under control. And sorry to harp on about it, but it is an aspect of South Africa which has really grabbed global headlines. When it comes to other aspects, you mentioned, of course, education. Do you think that we're improving enough on that front? Do you think the issues like the textbook saga would, of course, highlight issues around that?
Well, as I said, if you look at interventions that are being made at the higher level of education in terms of, for instance, tertiary education, we used to have a tertiary education was very low at 15% if you look at last year. But if you look at the movement that we have made, as I said, from 97 to 84, it does tell you that at the upper end of education, we are making significant improvements. Yes, indeed, we need to look very strongly at primary education to ensure that there is no mismatch in that progression from primary to tertiary.
Let's look at South Africa relative to competitors like China, because China's sitting at 29th, Brazil 48th, and India just behind us at 59th. So when we're sitting at 52 right now, do you think that's good enough? And what would your target be for South Africa?
Well, it can never be good enough. Our target is actually to be amongst the top 30 nations in terms of competitiveness by 2020. And that's what we are striving for. And I say one has to look at it in context in terms of the areas where we are making strides. Now, if you compare the current Global Competitiveness Index with the IMD yearbook on competitiveness, we actually moved 2 places from 52 to 50. And some of those areas are corporate efficiency and elements of governance efficiency. The one area that brought us down would have been the economy, and that obviously speaks for itself. The economic times have been very difficult globally, and most of the countries, as we have seen in this GCI, have also been negatively impacted.
So if you had to choose, say, the top 3 things that South Africa should concentrate on right now to be able to move into that space of top 30, that's 22 spaces, what would those be?
Some of these issues would be, I would say, education is critical. I think we need to really focus on the area of education, but we also need to look at innovation and technological advancement, because that as well is important. We already are coming off a very strong base on the other elements, which is the financial market, which is critical for economic development. But we need, obviously, innovation, productivity improvements, etc. And education and skills are going to be critical in that respect.
Miller, thank you very much for joining us today. Miller Matola, CEO of Brand South Africa.